how should they prepare for what and how AI is going to change the marketplace in the near future?
We talk a lot about AI, and you can find it on Substack. It's the Sreenet.
Or how should immigrants perceive digital equity when they go to the marketplace?
As much as there are technologies available to everybody, right?
How did we end up here, and how do we get ourselves out as a nation? Do immigrants have a role to play?
Be a good communicator, a clear communicator, and someone who can bring value.
You've held significant roles such as Chief Digital Officer for the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Very interesting.
When we had the floods in Morocco, the earthquakes in Libya, or vice versa last year, Twitter used to be, before that, the most useful tool of communication for first responders for crises. The number one best tool. Now my UN colleagues and friends tell me it has become totally useless in Morocco, totally useless in Libya because of what Elon Musk has done. And so what I tell people is that when you're looking at social media, you're looking at digital, looking at all of these tools, you look at the ones that make sense for you and use them as you can.
My name is Martin. I am the host of the Immigrant Nation podcast. This afternoon, we have the pleasure of hosting Sree. Sree, welcome to the podcast. And it's such an honor to finally have you. It was so much fun to look at your background and to see what you've been able to achieve in the last several years. Your immigrant story is very, very interesting. You were born to Indian parents that were ambassadors for India, and you've lived in a lot of countries. Of the many places you've been able to live, what was the most impactful for you?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the show. I'm delighted to be here. Anytime I can talk about immigrants, immigration, role of immigration in the world, I'm very happy to do so. And I wish you and the podcast the very best. I think the more we can talk about and celebrate free movement of peoples in the world, the better we all are. My own life story is very kind of you to say nice things. I was born in Tokyo to Indian parents, and from that moment I was an immigrant, right? I was a fish out of water in that hospital room. My father would say, hey, I have it's easy for me to find my son because he's the only brown one in that hospital window. He was looking for me. So I've lived in multiple places. In my first 18 years, I lived in 7 countries, and multiple places had big impact. Obviously, one of the places is Fiji, where I went to high school, which is as fun as it sounds, in the Fiji Islands. But also, it was impactful for me to live in the Soviet Union, in Moscow, where I was a good communist, and I used to speak fluent Russian, and I would say Lenin is God. And then I eventually moved to America, where I said John Lennon is God, and started talking about being a capitalist. So I've experienced many different things. I lived in Burma, I lived in Bhutan, I lived in India. All of these places have had a tremendous impact, and they are all the reason the man I am today.
That is very interesting. So you've cut your path into the digital space, and you have worked for really high-end profile organizations. Talk to us about the Mets. What was your most impactful moment or time when you worked for the Mets?
I've been blessed to work at multiple organizations, world-class organizations, including, you mentioned, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, one of the world's great museums. Where I was working on the future of culture. Before that, I was the Chief Digital Officer of Columbia University, working on the future of education. And after that, I was the Chief Digital Officer of the City of New York, working on the future of cities and citizens. At the Met, it was such a privilege to lead a team of 70 people working on art, culture, our history, our future. And I learned so much there, including how important it is for people to truly experience the great museums of the world, and how collegial the museum industry is, the amount of sharing of artifacts, the amount of conversations we would have. We would be learning from each other, from small museums, big museums, etc. It was also interesting to see how different people experienced the art when they came. I would do a lot of tours, and I remember having folks come from some countries. They would say, "Oh, you took this from our country. You took this from our country." That's the attitude that some places have. And in fact, there have been questions about what they call provenance. Was this exported the right way from the country at the time, and all? There are all these questions. All museums have that. But I remember bringing a group of Syrian journalists, and they said, "Do you have any art from Syria?" So I took them to a room where there's beautiful art from Syria, these blue pottery. It's just stunning. And I expect them to say, "Oh, you've taken this from our country." You know what they said? They said, "Thank you. By keeping it here, it is safe, because in our country, we've lost most of this quality art, has been destroyed or lost for a variety of reasons." So it was just very interesting to see that. As an Indian myself, I would see beautiful Indian art here, and some part of you says, "Should this be in India?" But I also see the value in it being present and being seen and consumed and enjoyed by the world. So finding that balance is always something for museums to think about.
That's very interesting. So, when we were looking at your background experience, I came across a very interesting statement. And you said, "I look," and I quote, "I look at my job as chief listening officer." Why do you consider yourself a chief listening officer?
I think every organization needs somebody who is listening to trends, listening to new ideas, listening for changes that are coming. And what we have seen in the last 20 years, so much change in communications, technology, digital opportunities. We're going to see that accelerated even more in the next 2, 5, 7 years. So organizations can get very comfortable and move very slowly, but we need to move faster. And that's what I do. So after I left the city of New York, I now run my own small consulting business around technology, digital, AI, all of those things. And what we're seeing, of course, is how fast things are changing, right? If you think about AI, it came out of nowhere. So this idea of listening is to see what is happening, not just listening to your customers, which is really important, but also what is happening at society at large. So you can catch trends that will help you be successful.
How should immigrant business owners and immigrants in general look at social media and optimize social media so that they can grow their brand and also be able to move their product quickly?
Yeah, this is the hardest thing. Like, I talk about two ways in which you can think of my work. So my life's mission now is defined by two things. One is that the scarcest resource of the 21st century is human attention. How do we get it? Keep it, grow it. It really matters. And I did a TEDx Broadway talk on this subject. The second thing is that we have two footprints. I call it the theory of the two footprints. One footprint is everyone who knows and loves us is our physical footprint. And our digital footprint is everybody else in the world. If you don't raise your digital footprint, you're leaving opportunities, impact, influence, money on the table. And we want to raise that as much as possible, right? So, I mean, perfect example is just our own conversation here. The fact that Martin and I are having this chat is because somebody found me online, and Sam found me, and then we were able to be here, right? So who are the people who don't know you? And so as you talk about business and immigrants running any business, it doesn't matter if you're selling a product, idea, or service. And usually you're selling one of those three things. Sometimes you're selling all three things. If you're selling a service, idea, or a product, if you're selling one of those three things, you can use social media to really reach new people, because the people who already know you is a much smaller portion of the world than the people who don't know you.
That's very interesting. Thank you. So, part of optimizing immigrant resources is understanding our background, our culture, and how we immerse ourselves into a new culture. Because when you were growing up, you lived in so many places. What did you eventually consider to be your culture, and how did that conflict with you settling in to the American system and way of life?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I don't think I'd be successful today if I wasn't an immigrant, because I understand from day one I was in a new place, right? Like from that hospital room to where I am today. Every place I've been, I'm typically either the only person of color or there's some many different. For a long time, I was the youngest person in every room I was in, and then now I'm 53, so now I'm the old guy. But
But keep
which
going.
is which is what all of us immigrants are about. We're different. The differences are what make you stand out. And when you take, even my name and everything's so complicated for Americans to understand. But along the way, what we've seen is how important it is for us to be able to see the differences, see the changes. That's all made a difference in my life because you are able to use that as a strength to be able to connect with people. I mean, just imagine every 3 years, it's one thing to migrate once in your life,
Mhm.
right? We would pack and move our bags and everything and move to a new country every 3 years. It was really difficult, much more difficult for my parents, obviously, because of they had to do all the work. But I had to show up in new schools and new countries, new languages, and I learned to be flexible, learned to be malleable, learned to adjust. Sometimes it worked out really well, sometimes it was a little more bumpy, but everywhere was about adjusting to your new environment, not trying to impose yourself in that environment. I once gave a talk, Martin, on a TEDx New York talk about immigrants and thinking I wanted to talk about immigrants. So I called it about the difference between natives and native born people and technology natives. They talk about digital natives as young kids who know technology, and I was making a case that digital immigrants are like I'm a digital immigrant. I'm not a digital native because I'm too old, right? I made my way to computers. People like you and others, younger people than me, grew up in that with technology, grew up digitally, right? So that's a digital native versus digital immigrant. And what I said is that just the way an immigrant to a country appreciates that country more because they chose to come. They struggled in many cases to come. They had to pay a lot of money for education or something else to come. They have a different appreciation of people who were born in that country. Also, people born in that country take it all for granted, whereas those of us who immigrate choose to be there and we have to study for the citizenship test or anything else that it takes, right? So I made that comparison to technology. Digital natives just presume they know everything because they do know everything, they've seen everything. Whereas people like me who are one step older, we have to understand the technology. We have to read a manual the way a native, like an immigrant, has to read a map. A technology immigrant, a digital immigrant, has to read a manual or do a Google search. Whereas my children, who were born in this country and are digital natives, they just easily jump into technology, right? The same way I've seen that and I've learned that over my.
I am one of those people you referred to that um, pull out an Indian dance when it comes to LinkedIn in particular, right? Like I realize how important LinkedIn is as a digital asset, but I have not made the time to maximize my capacity in that field. And there's a lot of immigrants who are like myself. They're either stuck on Facebook or they're stuck in other platforms. How do we get to identify what is the better vehicle for us to put our thoughts out into the world?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of LinkedIn, and I did
Oh
my
my
first
goodness.
LinkedIn workshop, Martin, in 2006.
Yes.
I've been talking about the value of LinkedIn since 2006, begging to use it. Of course, over time, everybody started using it. It's been very successful, and it's now 1 billion people use LinkedIn. It's so important. But I
Yes.
think that we don't appreciate it enough. It's the most underappreciated of all the networks because Instagram and TikTok are more sexy. Facebook, all your cousins and friends are there, and Twitter, you can feel like you're talking to
Yeah.
journalists, celebrities. So LinkedIn has always been kind of the afterthought, unappreciated, boring. But now we have seen the power of LinkedIn. We have seen what it can do. We've seen who it can reach. So I encourage everybody to use LinkedIn more. If you're in any kind of business, you should be using LinkedIn more.
Of course. You talk about digital equity, and when I hear that, I feel like I should treat digital equity as an asset. What is it? What is it that, and how should we treat digital equity, or how should immigrants perceive digital equity when they go to the marketplace?
Well, this is, digital equity, you can look at it in different ways, but I will just say one thing is that as much as there are technologies available to everybody, right? When I was a tech reporter on local TV stations in New York, Channel
Mhm.
7, Channel 2, Channel 4, ABC, NBC, CBS, etc., I would talk about the digital divide and how in New York City there were people who did not have computers at home, but there were people who had other technology but didn't have computers because they were just not easily available. But today, thanks to cell phones and laptops, I think that divide has been reduced incredibly. And when I was at the Met, I was at the city. It was in City Hall working as chief digital officer of New York. We would talk specifically: how do we get laptops in the homes? How do we help families get these technologies? So that's been good. I think that has improved dramatically. But with AI, we're seeing so much change happening so quickly. We don't want to see the same concentration of power, concentration of money, inequality that has come from social media, from the internet. All the old days, we want to have new opportunities for people all over the world to participate equally in the digital revolution, in the AI revolution. We did not have that when it came to the previous rounds of technology. This time, we want that.
Very interesting. Sri, when you left the Met, you traveled quite a little bit and you focused your trip in India. What did you gather during that time period?
Well, one of the things I did was I was talking about Twitter. I did a Twitter tour of India, speaking on helping people do Twitter better. Unfortunately, as you know, Twitter is melting down right now because Elon Musk has taken $44 billion and set it on fire. And he has basically, I don't like Elon. I think he has done some interesting things, and he has done many business things in an interesting way, and has changed the conversation about electric vehicles, for example. Those are all good things. But but what he has done to social media is a permanent change in the landscape. So, for example, when we had the floods in Morocco, the earthquakes in Libya, or vice versa last year, uh, Twitter used to be, before that, the most useful tool of communication for first responders, for crises. The number one best tool. Now, my UN colleagues and friends tell me it has become totally useless in Morocco, totally useless in Libya because of what Elon Musk has done. And so, what I tell people is that when you're looking at social media, you're looking at digital, looking at all of these tools, you look at the ones that make sense for you and use them as you can. By the way, the other thing that happened when I left the Met, Martin, that might surprise some of your listeners, is that they were having financial difficulty. I I loved my job. I was doing great. I met every benchmark. I got rave reviews. But one day they called me in and said, "You're leaving the Met." The chief marketing officer, chief design officer, and chief digital officer, that's me, all three of us left on the same day. And I was lost. I didn't know what to do. So I went on Facebook and said, "I've lost my job. Tell me what to do next." And I gave people a Google form to fill in, and 1,400 people filled in that form with some good ideas, some terrible ideas. But at the worst moment of my life, I had a global digital hug, and I felt so much better as a result of that. So, by the way, what I tell immigrants and other people who ask me about jobs, or job hunting or any of those things, I said on a scale of 1 to 10, what I did was a 20, and nobody should do that. But others do a 2 on a scale of 1 to 10 when they lose their job. Instead, go out, talk about it. Do a 6 out of 10. Don't do, no need to do a 20 out of 10. And PBS NewsHour, one of the biggest news shows here, came and did an 8-minute segment on me. More than 100 articles were written about me and my situation. Like, who's this crazy guy talking about his job loss? But we did that because we wanted to make sure that I can help people understand that when you lose your job, 90% of the time it's not your fault. It's that loyalty goes in one direction in business. Only the employer, from the employee to the employer, not the other way around.
Very interesting. I like what you're saying here. And so, as immigrants are pursuing their visions, they're pursuing their goals, they have business ventures that they're pursuing. Part of the struggle is not understanding clearly the dynamics of the environment they're exposed to, mostly because they've not spent enough time in the new country that have they have migrated to. What is the power of networking, and in today's age, how should immigrants work on building the and creating a network that can help them develop and influence their community?
What a great question. I think the most important part of that is trying to build your network when you don't need it so that it's there when you need it. Every day, build your network. Every day, build your connections. Anytime you meet somebody, get to know them, put them in your LinkedIn,
Yes,
connect with
of
them.
course.
Like when you're meeting people, don't be like, "Oh, what can you do for me? What can I do for you?" He or she becomes part of your network. Like for me, when I lost my job, it was the so many people said to me, "Sri, you're so lucky that you had that. I don't have that." And I say, build it today. Start building it now, because it takes that much time, it takes that much effort, over many many years, to be able to build that. It doesn't happen every day, doesn't happen automatically, doesn't happen overnight, but you have to make that effort over time to be successful.
Very interesting. Sri, there's listeners that are listening to you, and they're thinking about creating an environment where they can become successful. And when you talk about building your network now before you get to a place where you need it, how do you optimize that? How do you optimize, like break it down for someone who really has not been in the know-how to understand how do you build your network?
So you build it in different ways. You go physically to events. When people invite you to things, go to things, show up physically. In a world where there's so much virtual events, so many hybrid events, being there physically makes a difference. So go shake people's hands. People say, "Oh, I don't need business cards anymore." If you can have a business card, have a business card. Otherwise, exchange information, get their WhatsApp information. So physically do that. Second, go to virtual events. There's so many virtual events. Go to those. Network. When you see a speaker's name, write it down. Uh, Drop them a thank you note saying thank you. Like one of the things I love to say, Martin, is don't be an ask on social media. Don't be somebody who's always asking for things. Instead, be somebody who is giving information, is being helpful, or neutral. So a speaker, for example, if he gets a note saying "great talk, thank you," then he or she just she thinks, oh, oh, that's nice, he's not asking me for anything, right? But as you know, most people who write to speakers are, oh, can you help me with this, can you get me a job, can you do this, can you do that? Instead, just be out there giving information, helping people, and then when you need something, you'll get it all back.
Very interesting. Sri, what interested you in all careers into journalism? How did you choose to end up in journalism?
I told my parents when I was 12 I wanted to be a journalist, and they started crying. And because Indian parents want their kids to be doctors, engineers, etc. And if you ask me why specifically journalism, because I like storytelling. I knew you get to talk about the news. I heard you get to interview people. I love those things. But I'm sure I was affected by three famous journalists: Peter Parker, who became Spider-Man, Clark Kent, who became Superman, and of course also Kermit the Frog was also a reporter.
I can't imagine the battle because I've been at a place where I grew up with a lot of, if I may say so, Indian influence. So I know what the pressure from parents of Indian origin to get to careers that they consider to be stable careers. I know exactly. I can relate to you when it comes to that. But when did you decide this was going my path and I was gonna step away from what my parents want me to do?
No, I was 12, so I knew this is what I wanted to do. And then when I was 16, I got a byline in a newspaper in Fiji. The tagline of the newspaper was first newspaper published in the world today. Not the oldest newspaper, but first newspaper, because Fiji is where the date line goes, the Fiji Islands. So they have a sign in one place saying tomorrow, yesterday, tomorrow, yes. And when I saw my byline, I said, oh my God, this is what I wanted to do. Martin, I didn't even want to finish high school. I just I didn't want to go to college. I didn't want to do anything. I just want to talk to people, interview them about their work. That's all I wanted to do.
What motivated you to settle in the US, sir?
Well, I had first of all, I want to acknowledge my enormous privilege, right? A lot of other immigrants who come to countries like the U.S. struggle with distance, expense, opportunity, lots of barriers. As someone who came to study in the United States, I couldn't afford to live on my own. My parents were also posted here at the same time. Again, they'd come back to New York. So I was able to stay with my parents and study in New York. And then when I graduated, I was offered a job to stay at Columbia to teach, and I stayed for 20 years. So even though I've lived all over the world, New York has been the place I've lived the longest. Now 30 plus years, and then the young years growing up as well. So I think I've spent about 35 years in all in New York City out of my 53 years, living in different other countries as well. So why did I stay here? I've always said to people who can choose where to live, you should live where and work where you can do the most interesting,
Yes.
compelling work you can do. And again, that's from a point of privilege, right? I didn't do it because I could get, just survive for my children or anything like that. I could do that. I could choose where I'm going. And I and I knew New York was the place. That Columbia Journalism School is where I wanted to be, where I wanted to teach, and I did that for a long time. And what I love about America is that you can criticize it while loving it. And I criticize it on a daily basis. I say terrible things about lots of parts of America, including the infrastructure, the political system, the healthcare. Awful, right? Just awful. The divide in this country in politics. I say all of those things, but I can say those things, and that's what's important. A lot of countries in the world, you cannot criticize those institutions. When Donald Trump was in the office, I would tweet
Yes.
against him and his policies on a regular daily basis. You heard the term Trump derangement syndrome. Some people thought I had that. Like I was just but when he all the things he said and did, it just got me so angry. But I could speak up without being worried, and that's why I choose to live in this country.
Well, since you've opened this can, I'm just going to dwell here for a minute. In 2024, we have an election coming, and this is the year where we have the most elections in most democracies across the globe. I believe over 20 countries are holding elections. In America, we have two old men that are looking to become the next president of America. That's Joe Biden and Donald Trump. A country that has over 300 million people with as much talent and resources as we have, how did we end up here, and how do we get ourselves out as a nation? Do immigrants have a role to play?
Yeah, immigrants have a big role to play. Well, first is that every immigrant should, uh, you know, if they can become a citizen. Many of them are on green cards, and there's a long backlog for some countries to go from immigrant to citizen. But if you have the chance to become a citizen, please become a citizen, and then please register to vote, and then vote. As you know, Martin, in so many other countries, people vote at much higher levels than they do at the United States. In the United States, we get 30,
Hmm.
35, 40% turnout, sometimes much less than that. In other countries, sometimes you see 70%. I'm talking about real democracies, not Russia, where they have 90%. So, what we need to do is to have immigrants register, become citizens, and then register to vote if they can, obviously. And then the situation we're in now is that there's a country of many talented people, but a variety of reasons, including the fact that the political system is set up so that there isn't equal status, equal power for opportunities for other people to enter, right? The two-party system is entrenched. A lot of people from other countries are surprised at how these two parties are so entrenched that you cannot break through, you cannot cut through the slack, to cut through the like get in through get in. It's very hard, and that's one of the big problems here. And so, I think that immigrants have made a difference in the elections. As you know, in some places, Joe Biden won by 5,000 votes, 10,000 votes, 20,000 votes. There'll be many more immigrants in those states than those numbers. And so we're going to see immigrants turn out in major numbers in the United States this election.
You've held significant roles such as Chief Digital Officer for the Metropolitan Museum of Art and Columbia University. How did you navigate these positions, especially considering your immigrant background?
It's been the story of my life, being an outsider, and and just part of it is being a good listener and just listening to see what are people asking about, talking about. Like, that's really important. And in my case, I'm sorry, just going to the Met, I was an immigrant again because it was in a whole new industry. They wanted to hire somebody who knew nothing about arts and culture. So I went in there, and I would tell you, Martin, I would be sitting in meetings, and I would just write down words every day that I didn't know. I didn't know what I was writing down. I would have to guess. Like, they'd mention a name. I knew it was a name. I didn't know if it was a person, an artist, a
Yeah.
trustee, a piece of software. I just didn't know what it was. So then I would go back to my desk and go to Google and try to understand these things. So I was basically studying about a new industry. So if you're an immigrant, it's the same way. You're coming in, you speak different, you look different, you sound different, and then you have a whole new set of ways in which you have to connect with these people to understand. So a lot of work went in, and I was very lucky to be in white collar jobs where people were very deferential and collegial and welcoming and all of that. That is not the case for most immigrants, as you know. When they work in fields, it can be very difficult for them to cut through. So I'm very, very, very conscious of my.
If you're speaking to a young group of immigrant listeners that are looking to pursue a career in journalism or digital technology, communications, or establish their status on social media, what type of conversation would you have with him?
I would talk about the value of being a good writer, right? In anything you do, any field of communications you go into, writing matters. And in the AI world, you may think, oh, writing is less important because AI can just write for me. AI makes so many mistakes that if you can be your own original writer, maybe using AI also, but if you can use that as a layer on top, there's when you can be successful. And then whatever field of journalism or media you go into, be a good communicator, a clear communicator, and someone who can bring value because of your network, because of your experience, because of your history, your understanding of the topics you want to cover. If you can do all that, you're going to be a successful employee, not just a successful immigrant employee.
Very interesting. So for those of us who are listening to you speak and we're thinking, okay, you've had a really long time to get ready. You have had a diverse experience of having lived in multiple places in the world. And I am an immigrant and I'm just moving to the first country I've ever moved to. What are some of the struggles that you experienced in the past that you believe today immigrants are still struggling with? And how do we navigate those struggles?
Thank you. That's a great question. I again want to say that I was lucky that I was in that my first immigrant experience really was in a college, and in a college where there's so many cultures, so many, like at Columbia with students from 40 countries and 35 states. So we it was already a very mixed place, right? And it was in New York. As you know, New York is a great uh, melting pot of a city, a metropolitan city. Whereas if you end up in a small town in America, it can be very hard for people to understand you, to see where you fit in. So, having said that, I think the things I've learned is when you go into a situation, like I'll tell you, my daughter, by the way, started her summer internship today. She's a college student, started her internship. And what I said to her, thank you. I said, go in small, be humble, listen, learn. You're there to learn. You're not there to show off who you are or how much you know. Just go and listen. So she's like an immigrant, right? She's coming from a college, going into a new workplace. She doesn't know anybody. She's learning office dynamics. She doesn't even know where the bathrooms are. So go in there, be humble, be small, listen, pay attention, take notes. Those are things that you can apply at a larger scale to be the same way to be successful.
Very interesting. Um, I'm glad you brought up your daughter because, and I didn't think this conversation would go here, but let's go there. There is a huge disconnect between immigrant parents and their kids who are born here. Let me break it down further. There's a huge disconnect between first generation and second generation immigrants. And technology plays a big role in this. In that disconnect, how should or what would you say to immigrant parents so that they can be able to support their children who may not see the world the way they see it?
You mean because parents don't know all the opportunities, right? Most of the time, it's because of they don't know the opportunities. Even the story we say about me and journalism. What is it that immigrants are looking
Mhm.
for? They come to new places because they want better opportunities for their children, and they always look through the things that they know, what they're comfortable with, right? So you know that medicine is a good profession. You know engineering is a good profession. They want stability. They want safety. They want security. The things they didn't have. That's why they moved. If they moved, they moved because they wanted something to change. And then they come to America or any other country, and they don't want all the turbulence they went through for their children. So when a child says, "I want to be a journalist," they're like, "Wait a minute, that's such a difficult profession. So many changes happening, the internet, etc." Why would they want to do that? Why would you go for the safe, comfortable job? Not that I'm saying healthcare is comfortable or safe. It just it's predictable in a way that journalism is not. It's like, if your son says to you, "I want to be an actor," you're like, "Oh my God, that's such a difficult industry." And if you're an immigrant, it's even harder to say, "Oh, my son, go be an actor." It's just too hard. So part of it is educating your parents, teaching them what you'll be doing, what are the opportunities. I'm president of an organization called SAJA, South Asian Journalists Association, and we have 1,000 plus members. And I like to say that means we have 1,000 parents who are crying because their children became journalists, because they're almost all immigrant parents, right? So what we have to do is teach them the value. Like I tell immigrant groups all the time, you want your children to be these other professions, great, but also think about media, because if you want change to happen, you need journalists, you need TV reporters, you need newspaper reporters who can talk about your community, help your community by being out there in the media. So we need both. If we need both people in the safer jobs, more traditional jobs, as well as the new jobs.
You've been recognized by many organizations for bringing creativity and art into the thought process. When you're thinking about stepping into an organization and taking the lead and kind of guiding them into what the digital space is going to look like, what are some of the things you consider in that leadership role so that you can get that mass buy-in?
Yeah, I always think about what can you do when you come into a place, either as an employee, as I have as chief digital officer, or I come in as a consultant. People hire me now to do the same thing. It's all about what are the wins we can make for you? How can we help you do your job better? How can we help you have an impact fast? And that's what you want to do, because you want to show them that you're here on their side, you're here to help them, you're here to make their lives better. If they understand that, they'll be more welcoming. And by the way, that's also what immigrants have to do, right? When you arrive in a place, you have to say, "I'm not a threat. I'm here to help you. I'm here to be somebody who's contributing to the economy." So similar kind of thing we have to do as well.
You have written a few poems. Um, what inspired you into poetry, and how does that help you see the global village?
Well, I do a. I'm sorry, Martin. Just I don't. I'm not. Poetry is not me, so I'm not sure. I didn't want to say anything. You want to ask me that again? Might have been
All right.
my AI twin, and I know this can happen, so don't worry.
You've been recognized for your creativity and innovation in many fields. As a writer, what are some of your greatest works, and why do you consider them?
Well, I wouldn't say I have any greatest works. I have been a writer for a long time, and I'm very proud of having written hundreds, thousands of articles over time. I wrote the New York Times guide to career guide to social media in 2017. Very proud of that. I've written articles about explaining technology to people, so I'm proud of that. I have been part of many important projects, but my favorite story, Martin, I've ever written is about how blind people use the internet. And what was so interesting to me is that you think that blind people can't use the internet, but in fact, I've met people who do a lot of work around about the internet and happen to be blind in the process. One of my favorite people in the world is my former research assistant, Eliza Cooper, who is 100% blind, but was able to do so much for me. She used to run my social media, and she was blind, and so she would be able to do that. It was just a fantastic thing to see her at work. So I wrote about 10 years before I met her. I wrote about people using the internet and how they do it, and how I came to why I wrote the piece was I was at a lunch and I saw somebody like having trouble at the buffet line. He was looking around and he wasn't sure what he was eating, so he was asking for my help. He was legally blind, not fully blind, but legally blind. And then after he said, "What do you do?" He said, "Oh, I run websites." And I'm smiling because it's almost like a joke, right? You need to see in order to make websites, but he was doing it, and so I was so impressed that I then asked him, and then I did a story about that. So that's still my favorite story.
Very interesting. You've mentioned AI a couple of times. So, when immigrants are looking into the future, most of them are hearing the AI, they're interacting with it. How should they prepare for what and how AI is going to change the marketplace in the near future?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think number one thing is get smart about it. Read about AI, practice it, get in and do prompts and writing on prompts, playing with the various tools. I write a newsletter where we talk a lot about AI, and you can find it on Substack. It's sreenet.substack.com, sreenet.substack.com. But there are so many great newsletters and so many websites to learn about AI. Practice. Don't be scared. Jump in. You don't have to jump in fully. Maybe put your feet in first and learn what are the opportunities, what are the scams, what are the problems, and what are the things that are going to help me do my job better. That's how I do it.
Sri, we're coming to the top of the hour. What do you want to be your impact in this world?
I think I'm blessed already to have the impact I've had helping institutions, big and small, be better at their jobs, helping them reach their mission, whether I'm working for a UN agency or working with the Southern Poverty Law Center, which killed the Ku Klux Klan and is bringing down the Confederate statues, or small healthcare nonprofits. Every one of those organizations, I'm so proud to help them do their work, but I'm just a small part of it. I uh, I I'm just so proud of where we have come, all of us, in understanding what technology can do, what those of us who have spoken out against the problems of technology. A lot of people only talk about the good things, but some of us are good about talking about the problems of technology. And those are the things I think about a lot. Of course, in addition to my own family and being super proud of my children and my wife, and even my dog Tara, who helped me get through the pandemic, by the way, because before there was testing for COVID, the only way I knew I did not have COVID was I would smell her. She was, when she was dirty enough, I could smell her, and I knew I'm still alive.
Very interesting. Sri, I've tremendously enjoyed our conversation. Where can our listeners find you on social media?
Well, if you could spell my name, you can find me. But basically, look for me on Substack, and I'm on Sreenet on Substack, Sreenet on IG, and at Sree on Twitter, Sree.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've had the pleasure of speaking to Sree Sreenivasan from Bonn in Tokyo, Japan, grew up in the USSR, in Fiji, in India, and finally a citizen of the USA in New York. Sri, it's been such a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I am glad you made the time for us. I hope we can get to return the favor for you pretty soon.
Thank you so much, and good luck.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate you. Bye bye.